Hi, my name's Sean Millman. I hold a PhD in percussion from NYU, and I appreciate your time. I currently also am the adjunct professor of percussion for Missouri Southern State University. I teach remotely for the program there. I'm also the chair of the Percussive Arts Society Scholarly Research Committee. Through that, I manage the Percussive Notes Online Research Edition and the PAS Thesis and Dissertation Repository. And I'm also currently a drummer working on a cruise ship. This presentation, as you can see there, is entitled An Operational Approach to Deliberate Practice in the Collegiate Music Studio, Leveraging Human Performance Science to Help Our Students Achieve and Compete. Okay, so dessert before dinner, I'm giving away the punchline early. This is my 5-part deliberate practice loop. This is the key product from my dissertation research at NYU. We'll go into each of these 5 elements in depth over the course of this presentation. This is just a kind of quick hit overview of what this is. These 5 elements are taken from 3 separate research fields that we'll talk about on the next slide, and they interact to demonstrate how we can get better at a skill. They are domain general, which means these ideas work regardless of what someone is trying to get better at. Right? Whether they're trying to get better at, popular music drum set playing, or classical violin, or classical piano, or something like that. And they even work outside the music field. These work regardless of domain. So they might work in sports, they might work in something like military training or something like that. And there is research from each of these fields backing this up. These are ideas that help humans get better at skills and get better at just any domain and in domain general ways, and then we build domain specific applications on top of these concepts. Okay, real quick, we will see a lot of references from sports. The reason for that is that much of this science lives in that sports realm, and a lot of that is because it's easier to get good data from sports. As we'll see in a few slides here, kind of the original study and publication from which we get the term deliberate practice started in the music field, started with violin students in Berlin about 30 years ago. But a lot of the data since then in deliberate practice comes from sports. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And part of that, I think, is because in sports, it's easier to count things and to register new results and to see when we change something in our process, how does that result in improvement, right? You can think about something like free throws in basketball or batting averages in baseball or serve velocities in tennis or something like that. These are easily measurable, where something like improvement in music a lot of times is more subjective and is harder to count and harder to measure improvement over time. Now, my hope for this deliberate practice model is that it functions to bring together these various things from separate disciplines into a single unified construct that can help guide our practice and guide our application of peak performance strategies to help musicians train more effectively. Okay, these are the 3 research fields from which this research and my construct are primarily pulled. Expert performance, motor learning, and sports psychology. Here's a quick hit definition on what each of these are. The top one there, expert performance, you can think of as a discipline that asks the question, what explains expert performers in a given domain? What explains why Yo-Yo Ma is him and everybody else isn't? What explains why LeBron James is him and everybody else isn't? Obviously, what I just said is a gross oversimplification for a lot of reasons, but that's the fundamental question. What explains expert performers in a given domain? Motor learning, below that, this field is also sometimes called motor skill acquisition. This is the science of what is commonly and erroneously referred to as muscle memory, right? Our muscles don't actually remember anything. What is happening there is our brains are simply remembering the signals to send and the orders of signals to send to get our muscles and our bodies to do what we want them to. Motor learning is a study of how we train that over time. And then sports psychology at the bottom there is the study of kind of the mental game of peak performance. The way that you can think about how these 3 disciplines interact One way of thinking about that, the top one there, expert performance, tends to live in terms of improvement on a scale of years or decades. Yes, that discipline is very much interested in how we practice in, smaller increments, but it generally tends to live in the space of how do we craft a life of improvement in a given domain to become an expert or to gain expertise at something. Motor learning is on somewhat of a smaller scale. Again, that's about how we train our bodies to move to execute a skill in real time. And that tends to live on a shorter scale of how we train our bodies to move and how we train our minds to remember those signals. And then sports psychology at the bottom there is, again, the mental game of peak performance right in the moment of performance or right in the moment of practice as we train ourselves for that optimal mental game of peak performance. So a way to think about this is expert performance is over the long term, motor learning is over the midterm, and sports psychology is in the moment of performance or in the moment of a practice rep. That is a simplification, but it's, I think, a valuable one to help contextualize what these are. Now, this research started from me asking the question, why do we do things so differently in music than athletes and coaches do in sports? So I was at the University of Florida for my bachelor's and master's, and while I was there, in addition to my music training, I also was fortunate to have some relationships and front row seats, both literally and figuratively, to watch the athletics department there. And the culture and feel of how each side handled their business was so wildly different, and I wanted to know why. And I wanted to see what athletics was doing that might be able to make us better musicians and teachers and give us better relationships and better experiences and better cultures in music school, as well as help us win more auditions and get more gigs, get more work. And the last kind of bit of context or preambling here, I want to be very clear about a stance that I have on this, that within the college music community can be a little divisive, but this is where I come out on it. This presentation and my research are founded from an assumption of competition. Whether we want to admit it or not, music does have competitive elements in it. We have auditions, we have competitions. Even for freelance work where there isn't a stated audition, the contractor choosing one player over another is a type of audition that is competitive. Yes, of course, music is art, and there's an element to which competition is not an appropriate lens for what we do. But there's also an element where competition is an ever-present part of what we do. And this research takes that seriously from the perspective of, in order to get work, in order to win auditions, whether we'd like to admit it or not, there's a competitive element, and at some point we're going to have to beat someone. Okay, so this is the closest thing I have to a mentor. This guy is Jason Haheim. He's one of the two principal timpanists of the Metropolitan Opera in New York. I owe a lot of this research to him pointing me down the right paths. I started asking those questions around 10 years ago in 2013. And once I met Jason when I moved to New York to start my PhD in 2015, he kind of started showing me where a lot of the research lies that have taken me down the route to what I believe are some of the answers. And I would be very remiss if I did not credit him for his influence on this research. Not all of it comes from him. A lot of it has been me after he sort of showed me the way in, but it would be wrong of me not to credit him. Okay, so back to the loop here. We're going to give a slightly deeper explanation of what everything is. So motivation at the front end. There's obviously this idea of I want to do this, therefore I will practice hard, right? And that obviously is an important part of getting better at anything, including music, but that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about for the purposes of deliberate practice is motivation refers to these psychological factors that when they are present, we know results in human beings learning better and more efficiently. And you can see those two lower bullet points there, and we'll get to those as we get to motivation in depth. Mental representation is a term that refers to our mental model of what the ideal performance looks like of a given thing that we might be working on. Pre-performance routines refers to these routines that we go through right in the last few seconds before a performance to create consistency and reliability and predictability and kind of get us in the rhythm of a performance. And then feedback is how we determine how we're doing. And it comes from three sources there. And then the last element here is prioritization of determining what we should practice, how we should spend our time in the practice room to get the best return on that practice time investment. Okay, so this man is the unfortunately late K. Anders Ericsson. He's notable as basically the founder of deliberate practice research and kind of the key figure in this research field. And that study there that is cited is his famous 1993 study of violin students in Berlin. That the key finding from that was, spoiler alert, the ones who had practiced more were better. And while hopefully that seems somewhat obvious to us as college music, practitioners, that was a somewhat controversial statement then, and it remains a little bit of a controversial statement now. There are scholars who disagree with some of Ericsson's ideas about deliberate practice. That's kind of outside the scope of this presentation, but those ideas are out there, and there is a debate about this. This study, this 1993 study, is where we get the term deliberate practice, which refers only to activities that are specifically designed to cause improvement. This study is also the foundation for the so-called 10,000 hour rule, which was a misunderstanding and misapplication of the work of Ericsson and those co-authors there, that basically took a general observation of this study that found that in many cases, when someone reached around 10,000 hours, they also tended to reach expert level performance in that domain. But then this, as it made its way out into the popular zeitgeist, ended up being put in 10,000 hours of work and you will become an expert. That guarantee was never made by the research. That's not reliable. And Ericsson and his co-authors never said that. That is a misquote. That is a misunderstanding and a misapplication. Now, of this deliberate practice research, which again is a question of what explains expertise, what explains expert performers in a given domain, music and sports are kind of the two primary fields that are researched in this discourse. They're not the only ones. There are plenty of other fields that research is done in, and plenty of other places that my reading has been in, just in particular. The first study, again, as I mentioned, was in music. Many of the other studies by Ericsson and by other people interested in this are in sports. And again, I think that's because A, those are very interesting places to look. B, I think the sports community is very interested in how to get better. Also because of the specter of competition, there's always someone coming to beat you. And the other thing, again, is I think sports is a very good place to find clean data and be able to count things and see how improvement is going. Okay, so the first element of the loop, this is motivation. Now, again, obviously motivation has a connotation of desire, of wanting to engage in the activity. That's not what we're talking about here. This process, this deliberate practice process, is effective for doing the work. Once that decision has been made, I'm not here to get people to want to do the work. But that kind of motivation, that desire motivation, is kind of the keys to the engine that makes this whole thing go. What we are talking about here in motivation are physiological and psychological factors that affect how well we encode that motor learning, right? The top bullet there, enhanced expectancies, this is fundamentally confidence based on past experience. It's what I expect to happen when I begin a rep. It's the idea that because I have seen myself get better over the past, I expect that the next time I perform, it will go well. My expectation is enhanced. Confidence. And then the bottom one there is autonomy. This is fundamentally choice. Ownership and agency simply through choice. And what the research actually shows is that these choices don't actually need to be task relevant. So for example, I'm a percussionist. Let's say we're talking about playing a xylophone excerpt. The idea is you might give a student some choice of which mallets do you want to use to play this excerpt. That's a very task relevant choice that affects the sound and might affect the feel and all that sort of things of how it feels for the player to play that. There's also something like a task irrelevant choice, like which wall of the practice room do you want the xylophone to face? That doesn't actually change the task, but just by giving a choice to the learner, we know that that improves learner retention and efficiency of learning. Okay, so these two scholars are Gabrielle Wolf on the left and Rebecca Luthwaite on the right, and they proposed the citation that you'll see down at the bottom, which is the optimal theory of motor learning. This is a 2016 publication, and basically what this is there's this idea in various fields of science, not just the three that we're talking about here, where we do a lot of science and we learn a lot of things. And then we need an overarching kind of umbrella theory, or sort of a theory of everything that explains everything we know together in one kind of overall overarching umbrella theory. And then the idea is we go back and we do some more science and we learn some more things. And now the old umbrella theory doesn't quite cover everything. Or maybe we've learned that some things that we thought were true maybe aren't true. And we need to update that overall theory of everything umbrella theory. And this was these two authors' attempt to do that, to create a new sort of umbrella theory for motor learning. And the publications that I've read since this came out have shown that their ideas and their kind of amalgamation and sublimation and bringing together of all of these existing researches at the time, their theory has largely held water and kind of works. So the next two slides here, I'm going to show you a diagram from their publication, from the optimal theory. The first slide is going to be directly taken from their publication there. Obviously, I'm citing this, and except I've pulled one element away, and then in the second slide, I'm going to bring that element back just for clarity of understanding how this works and what we're looking at. Okay, so this diagram is from the optimal theory from the two authors that we just saw. Again, there's one element missing from this. I'm going to bring that back on the next slide. Here's what we're looking at. You can think of this as a math problem where everything except motor learning is the equation itself, and then motor learning in the bottom right there is the answer, or the solution to the equation. What we're trying to do with this optimal theory of motor learning, what we're trying to do as we practice, is to get better at a skill. So the result, what we're looking for, is improvement of motor learning. So you can see everywhere on this page, inside a box, where you see an up arrow, there are three of them here, that refers to the learner getting better at something. And then everywhere on this page, it's just this one spot where you see a down arrow right here, that refers to the learner getting worse at something. Our goal is we want to get better at motor learning, and everything else on this page feeds into that. What is the difference between motor learning and motor performance? Motor learning is improvement over time. Motor performance is one singular rep, right? One practice rep, one free throw, one rep of a major scale, one whatever, okay? Whatever it is that we're doing. One example of an archer pulling the bow back and letting an arrow fly. Whatever skill, whatever domain we're in, it's one rep. And then motor learning is improvement over time. Okay, so left to right here. On the far left, we have motivation, right? Autonomy and enhanced expectancies. That's choice and confidence, like we spoke about just a little bit ago. On the bottom left here, I'll just kind of quick hit on this. That's an attentional factor. And what that basically says from the optimal theory is that we know that when a learner is focused on their own body, their bones, their fingers, their muscles, whatever, that that can cause interference in learning because they're focused on their own body and their own self, versus an external focus is a focus on the task goal. If you look in the center here, focus on the task goal makes us better, and focus on the self makes us worse. So an example here for external focus might be something like for a free throw shooter in basketball, focusing on their elbow being straight or their legs being bent or the muscles in their legs or something like that has a tendency to make us worse, versus focusing on the rim might have a tendency to make us better. That's what external focus is a focus on something outside of our own body. Then you get into the middle there, focus on the task goal makes us better, focus on ourselves or our own body tends to make us worse and interfere. If we get those right, that results in a better individual rep, a better singular performance of the motor skill, which over time, as we get more and more better reps, results in improved motor learning, which again is the goal of this whole process. Okay. Okay, so now I have brought back that last element of the diagram that I took away, and this element is this line, extending from motor performance to the right, down, around, up, and then back to enhanced expectancies. What this line fundamentally means is that an individual motor performance, a singular rep that is improved, results in enhanced expectancies, which again is just improved confidence. Is this idea that I have seen myself perform better over time, I have seen myself improve, therefore the next time I perform this skill, I have an expectation that it will go better than it did in the past, right? Enhanced expectation. Improved confidence. That enhanced expectancy then feeds into greater focus on the task goal, which feeds into future reps, making my future individual repetitions better. And then that over time increases motor learning, which increases my trajectory of learning. This is this virtuous cycle, this loop of improvement. Okay, so the second element of the loop here is the mental representation. This is the idea of visualizing the music that you're about to perform before you play it, or of hearing something in your head beforehand, or of an athlete visualizing their perfect performance before they go out on the field or the court or whatever performance venue that is. So mental representation is an Erikson term. It refers to essentially what our mind's eye and ear hold as the model. It's an internal videotape of how we would like to play if we could execute precisely what we wish to. Now, the mental representation is an idea that I have found and that Jason has found and that I think other people in the deliberate practice space have found is maybe the most complicated or hardest for people to wrap their heads around, maybe at the beginning of being exposed to it. So my definition, there are many definitions of mental representation to help try to get this idea across. My definition is that it is a combination of memory and imagination that represents the highest possible level of performance of which an individual can currently conceive. I'll read that again. It's an important definition. It is a combination of memory and imagination that represents the highest possible level of performance of which an individual can currently conceive. Now, the two sub-bullets there, visualization and external focus. Visualization, again, is just visualizing something before you go and perform. And then external focus is that attentional factor of motor learning where we talked about that placing our focus on something outside our body is more helpful than placing our focus on our body itself. Visualization there is this idea of mental rehearsal, creating the visualized videotape in your mind, that combination of memory and imagination. And on the next slide, we're going to see ways to systematize doing that in a helpful way. So this is the Petlep model of motor learning. Comes from Holmes and Collins from a little more than 20 years ago. The diagram on your screen right there is not actually from their publication. It's from the Caroline Wakefield citation down below there. I just think it's a cleaner diagram of this idea for the purpose of this presentation, but it's fundamentally the same idea. It's the same data, right? It's the same idea. So what does Petlep stand for? As you can read on your screen there, physical, environment, task, timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. These are the 7 elements that Holmes and Collins have stated should be present in a really great mental representation. I don't believe that they use that terminology. They are sports psychologists, and mental representation is an Erikson term. Erikson, again, primarily lives in that deliberate practice or expert performance research field. This is a crossover of research findings from these disparate but linked fields. So what do these 7 things mean, right? So physical, right? You can see there stance and implements used, right? What is your body doing? Are we standing? Are we sitting? That kind of thing. What kind of motions are we making? Environment, where is this happening? Is it happening on a concert hall? Is it happening on a football field, right? Either for football players or in the drum corps world, right? Or competitive marching band or that kind of thing. Where is this taking place? A level deeper of environment is what are the environmental conditions? Is it cold? Is it humid? Is it dark? Is it very bright, right? Task. What are we doing? What music are we performing? Are we playing Rachmaninoff? Are we playing Sondheim? Are we playing Bon Jovi, right? Timing. Obviously, this is important for musicians. Again, this particular idea, this Petlep model of motor imagery, did not come out specifically for musicians. These are sports psychologists. You can see there the original citation is from the Journal of Applied Sport Psychology. And timing is relevant to performers of basically anything in a real-time domain, right? Sports, combat, anything like that. Speed is a relevant element. And then for music, obviously, it's an even more intrinsic element of what we do. Then the next one here is learning. You can see the note in the Wakefield diagram there is updating the script as learning occurs. This means as we get better, as we have more improved individual motor performances and our motor learning improves over time, we improve our mental model. We improve that mental videotape of ourselves playing as perfectly as we can understand over time. And then the next one here is emotion. Now, I break this category into two separate subcategories, one of which is what I believe the authors meant originally, which is the emotion that we feel as the players, right? What is the athlete going through? What is the musician thinking? What are they feeling while they perform? This might be something like if a student or an auditioner or any musician knows that they get nervous in the type of performance that they're preparing for, then you might practice putting yourself in that nervous frame of mind to prepare for it beforehand, so that as you're visualizing yourself performing as well as you can possibly perform, you're visualizing yourself perform as well as you can possibly perform while nervous. And then the other element of emotion is encoding the emotion that we would like the audience to feel. And those can be different things, right? That a musician might feel nervous or joyful or very analytical while performing a piece of music, even though that piece of music is very tragic or triumphant or something like that. They might be two separate emotional ideas. And then the last one there is perspective. From this model, Holmes and Collins suggest that most of this imagery should be done through first person, meaning to do this combination of memory and imagination from your own mind's eye of what it looks like to be in that position to do that. But they also leave room for, in certain applications, it might be relevant to have a third person model as well. I suggest that music is one of those models. There are many reasons for that. One of those is the amount of self-recording that is required, and we'll get to self-recording later in this presentation. And another is the element of music is to a certain degree being perceived by an audience, so understanding how we are being perceived is important for creating this model. Okay, so the next element here is pre-performance routines. For any sports fans out there, you might very easily be able to understand this in terms of basketball players right before taking free throws, or pitchers and hitters in baseball right before each pitch, of having a given routine that they go through to get themselves in rhythm to create consistency and reliability before engaging in a task. The two sub-bullets there are centering and first-time execution. Centering is a technique from one very specific sports psychologist who we'll see on the next slide here. And then first-time execution is largely what the goal of a pre-performance routine is often we will have a scenario where we're better on the second rep of a given performance than we are on the first. That's problematic for us as musicians because we very rarely get a second rep of something that is actually meaningful. We usually only get one rep in a meaningful performance or in an audition or something like that. So we have a vested interest in doing whatever we can to make that first time execution reach our maximum potential as it is in the moment. Okay, so centering is this three-part pre-performance routine that's associated with Dr. Don Green, who we'll learn more about on the next slide here. And the last element of that process, the first two elements are focused on breathing, but the last element is the one that I really want to talk about here, which is focused on a cue word or a process cue, which is a word or phrase designed to load the mental representation into the player's mind. This is a link from the previous element, the mental representation. Part of the pre-performance routine's goal is to load that mental representation into the player's mind. The reason for this is we know that when we are accessing a skill from our motor memory, from our motor learning, our motor skill acquisition, that short-term memory is better than long-term memory for execution of that skill. So part of the point of the pre-performance routine is to move the skill out of our weaker long-term memory and into our stronger short-term memory. Now, this process or keyword should be a simple and general statement of the ideal, something like pure or dark or martial, tragic, triumphant. It should not be something technical like don't go sharp or breath support or keep pinky on the stick or something like that. The idea here is to, kind of in that archery example, to sort of let the arrow of the performance fly instead of overthinking things, overthinking the performance and trying to walk the arrow to the target and stab the target with the arrow. The idea is to pull back and let it go. This is a connection to the optimal theory of a focus on the task instead of on ourselves. Okay, so this is Dr. Don Green. I think many musicians at this point are familiar with his work, but in case you're not, was a Green Beret in the United States Army and then got into sports psychology and was working with Olympians, and I believe somewhere around 20, 25 years ago, began working with orchestral musicians as well. So again, we know that short-term memory is better than long-term memory, which is why in many cases our second rep is better than our first. One benefit of a pre-performance routine can be moving the skill into short-term memory, which is better, out of long-term memory, which is worse. And something that can help with that is what's called a task-relevant motion. Now, for a long period of time, this is another example from basketball. For a long period of time, the highest percentage free throw shooter in NBA history was Steve Nash. He has since been passed by Steph Curry. But while Nash was playing, he was an unbelievable free throw shooter, and had again, until Curry passed him, had the highest free throw percentage in the NBA history. His free throw pre-performance routine was to take his shot as perfectly as he could without the ball before the ref gave it to him. Now, this is important because, again, we were talking about first to second time execution. NBA players have about a 5% better percentage on second shots than first. And the reason for that is that first shots are out of long-term memory because it's been a long time since they've used that skill. Then the second shot is out of short-term memory because they just used the free throw skill. Nash's pre-performance routine of miming his entire shot as perfectly as he could functionally moved the skill into short-term memory, and Nash had virtually no difference between first and second shot percentages. Now we can think about this for musicians. Think about, for example, an orchestral wind player coming up to an exposed solo entrance after a long tacet. There's no reason that that player can't go through the fingering and airflow motions a few bars before the actual entrance to move the skill out of long-term and into short-term memory. Audition scenarios are even easier to apply this because we can build a pre-performance routine before each piece and mimicking or targeting that pre-performance routine to each individual excerpt that we know might be asked in an audition, and to say, before my Shostakovich, this is what I'm going to do. And then before my Gershwin, this is what I'm going to do. And then before my Beethoven, this is how I'm going to breathe, and all of that sort of thing. We can create individual pre-performance routines for each individual task. Okay, and then the last two elements of the loop here are pretty interrelated. That's feedback and prioritization. Now, feedback comes from three separate sources, as you can see there: self, peer, and coach. Self-feedback is self-recording. Even a smartphone is fine for almost all of the information needed, and then dedicated recording equipment can also be useful down the line for more high fidelity, more intricate information that we might need for feedback. Peer feedback is mock auditions, mock performances, mock recitals, mock anythings, right? Playing for our peers who are somewhat reasonably as well informed about the music as we are. And then coach feedback is the thing that I think for musicians we are most familiar with, which is lessons, right? In our case, for music, right, one-on-one lessons, go to our lesson teacher, have, our traditional 1 hour lesson and play for them and get feedback and get diagnosis and prescription, right? Here's what's going on, that here are these opportunities to get better, and then prescription, here's how to do that. Now, one idea here for long-term efficiency is that if we use the first two sources of feedback correctly, self and peer, then our lessons with our teacher or our coach feedback will be much more efficient with less diagnosis and more prescription, more information transfer, getting more of that juicy information that the student actually needs, and less diagnosis of a problem, so that a student, instead of walking in and being told, hey, you're flat on this note, or you're rushing throughout this entire piece of music, can walk in and already know that that is happening, tell their teacher, this is the issue that I think is going on, and then the teacher can go, yes, I hear that as well. Here's how we can deal with that. Things can be more efficient without the slowing down element of having to figure out what's going on. And then the last one here is prioritization. Now, prioritization is the most domain-specific element of this loop, because it's hard to prioritize what you're working on without knowing exactly what you're working on, right? So the two sub-bullet points there are performance grading and inflection points, right? So basically what this boils down to is taking those feedback sources, taking that feedback data, because one way of thinking about deliberate practice is that it is the scientific method applied to your craft. So in prioritization, we take that data that we've gotten from self-feedback, from peer feedback, and from our lessons, and we prioritize what are the most important elements to focus on, and then we design new practice sessions to get better and target those priorities. Now, the next slide comes from Jason Haheim, one of the two principal timpanists at the Met. This is 100% his slide, so I want to give him credit for it. And I also want to acknowledge that he would give credit for some of these ideas to his teacher, John Tafoya, or one of his teachers, John Tafoya, who teaches at Indiana University. Now, what this is a pyramid of prioritization of feedback, right? You can see there at the top, Jason calls this a three-legged stool pyramid of priorities. There's a three-legged stool on the bottom and then a pyramid above that. Now again, Jason is an orchestral timpanist. Now he's working with the Metropolitan Opera. So this pyramid was targeted for what he was working on. You can take this idea and plug anything else in there, right? For example, if we're working for a drum corps drumline auditioner, somebody auditioning for a drumline in a major drum and bugle corps, intonation, that middle blue leg of the three-legged stool, is not really relevant, because snare drummers, quad players, and marching bass drum players do not control intonation while they are performing the instrument, right? Tuning drums is kind of a separate skill that is not part of performance and is not part of auditioning, right? So we can pull intonation out of that, and we can put having your feet in time in that spot, right? You can put marking time and being able to do maybe body visuals in that same spot. Things can be transferred out and transferred in based on the specific domain that we're working in, but this fundamental idea kind of holds true. So what is the reason for the three-legged stool? Well, how does a three-legged stool work? If you knock one of the legs out, what happens? The stool falls over, and so does anything sitting on top of it, right? So these bottom elements here, right, for orchestral timpani, for Jason, time, intonation, rhythmic integrity, if any of those are wrong, everything above that in the performance falls apart and doesn't matter. If it's out of time, it does not count, right? That's a quote from an old marching band staff member of mine. If it's out of tune, it doesn't matter how wonderful your phrasing is or how wonderful your idea of musical connection is. If your rhythms are incorrect, it doesn't matter if you have the greatest mallets in the world or the greatest, horn sound in the world or the best Stradivarius violin. If we get these bottom basic things wrong, it's just not going to connect with an audience and thus is not an effective performance, right? These are these objective ideas at the bottom. And then as you move higher, we get into more subjective ideas, right? Like you can see at the top, your tone or X factor, energy, owning the chair, that kind of thing. In a lot of cases, the things at the top of the pyramid are the things that we're really excited about as musicians and as artists. But the things at the bottom are where if there's a problem, that's a glaring problem that has to be fixed immediately, because it is destroying the overall um, um, integrity of the performance, right? And again, this isn't just for orchestral timpani, right? You can see over on the right, Jason has these brackets marking that, in prelims, this is kind of the area in the objective zone that committees tend to be listening for. And then in semis, we move a little bit up the pyramid. And then in finals, you've gained a lot of trust by the fact that you're there. So then they're looking for these top level, really truly subjective, artistic elements of the pyramid. So this structure of prioritization can help us determine where we need to put our practice minutes, our practice hours, where we need to put our practice focus by saying, if I have two separate elements that are problems in my music right now, if one of them is lower on the pyramid, that's a more important problem because it's causing more damage to my ability to connect with an audience than the higher one. Okay, and then now we're getting back to the loop idea of everything feeding back on itself. So we're coming back to motivation for the second time. As we get there, our confidence is higher from the improvement made in practice, from watching and listening to all those recordings and seeing objective evidence of improvement. We have literally shown ourselves that the next time we act, it will be better than the last. The mental representation gets updated with these memories of newer, better recordings and with a higher fidelity imagination because we understand more about what we're working on. With pre-performance routine, at the very least, when we go through our pre-performance routine, it is enhanced because we are loading that newer, better mental representation into it. But also, we can update the pre-performance routine if we find there's something else that we need to load into short-term memory, or if there's more effective cue word, or if there's something new that we need to focus on. Maybe we've fixed an old problem and we need to focus our mental energy on a new focus point. So we can update our pre-performance routine for where we currently are in our learning journey with that particular skill. Getting feedback is improved because we now have a better idea of what to watch and listen for. Maybe we know better camera angles to show us what we need to see. Maybe we have a better idea of what to listen for. We hopefully can ask better questions of our mock panels or of our lesson teacher. And we just get better feedback because we're moving higher up the pyramid. And interpretation work is always more fun than that was flat or this part dragged or that is an incorrect pitch or an incorrect rhythm. Then our prioritization process is better because again, we have more information about what matters and what doesn't in our performance and where to put our focus. So the last thing I'm going to do here is, the second to last thing I'm going to do here is give a very quick example of how all of this runs together. So let's say that I were taking orchestral timpani auditions. I'm not. I have a couple of friends who are, but let's just say hypothetically for the purpose of this presentation that I were. What's on the screen now is maybe the most important orchestral timpani excerpt that there is. This is the end of movement 1 of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And this is a very, very commonly asked timpani excerpt. So if you look at letter S there, the second from the bottom line, we have 8 bars that have 30-second notes and a release, right? Digga 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 dum, 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 right? We have that 4-bar phrase twice in a row, and then there's a pickup to the next line. These 8 bars are theoretically very simple. They're just a set of 9 notes in each bar on one singular drum that should be even, or should ostensibly be even. They are theoretically very simple, but they are very hard to play evenly. This is a notorious section for hand-to-hand evenness for orchestral timpanists. And this is a very easy, significant indicator for audition panels because if those 30-second notes are even and clear and clean, then the timpanist sounds good, and if they are not, then the timpanist sounds bad. This is one of those sections that is kind of a very binary test, right? So playing these evenly is a great target. It's a great priority for us to have. And we know that playing with the exact same consistent beating spot, stroke height, stroke velocity, and stick angle will be the way that we do that. If you're not a percussionist, don't worry. Hopefully you can just take my word for that. And if you are a percussionist or a timpanist, then hopefully we can agree that those things are important. So as an example, very quickly taking through this, right? First element of the loop is motivation, right? So I have this desire motivation of I want to practice this excerpt because I know it will be asked and I theoretically, hypothetically want to win a timpani job, and playing this well will help me win that job. But also there's enhanced expectancies. So hopefully I've been practicing timpani for quite some time and I have confidence in my timpani playing, and there's autonomy. So maybe I'm choosing where in my practice session to play this. Maybe it's the first thing, maybe it's the last thing, and I'm giving myself that choice. Maybe I'm choosing which wall in the room to point the timpani toward, or I'm making a choice of which mallet I'm using, or I'm making the choice of how I will dampen, right? I'm making all of these choices in this music that give me ownership and agency over my individual interpretation of this, this excerpt that hundreds and thousands of timpanists have played before me. Mental representation, right? I have a picture in my mind's eye and ear of what the excerpt sounds like played perfectly, including perfectly even 30-second notes at letter S. Again, a mental representation is a combination of memory and imagination, right? And in my memory and imagination of me playing this the way I want to play it as perfectly as I can, in the 30-second notes at letter S, my time is even, my volume is even, my tone is even, everything is consistent. I create a pre-performance routine. Before I play this excerpt in practice, I think about that ideal and I say a cue word in my mind. For our purposes, since we're focusing on evenness there, we'll say the cue word is even. Then I play and I'm recording myself. After I play, I stop the recording on my phone or on my video recorder and I watch and I listen back. And this is me getting self-feedback. Let's say that I hear that my 30-second notes are not even. Maybe I've worked on this one for a while and they're good in terms of time and rhythm, but the volume of those 30-second notes is not even. Maybe my right hand is louder than my left hand. So then I go to my next lesson and I tell my teacher, hey, it seems like the 30-second notes at letter S are in time, but they aren't dynamically even. Do you hear that as well? And if so, what do I do about it? And my teacher says, yeah, your left hand is creeping up higher than your right hand, and that's causing your stick angle to be different, and that's the reason for your different sound hand to hand. All of that was feedback. But now my teacher just told me a new target, stick angle. With that information, I know where to put my video camera because I'm looking for this stick angle information, not because what I'm looking for is to make my performance look really great. This is not a drum corps audition where the visual is a really important part of it, but because I'm looking for a audio fix, I'm looking for a sound fix out of my performance of the 30-second note passage at letter S, and I know that I can diagnose problems with that with certain visual information of how my hands are interacting with the mallets and the timpani head. And with all of that, I have more knowledge about what causes something good to happen, and I know what I need to do. I have autonomy and control over my improvement and the belief that if I do this thing better, my performance will improve. This takes us back to motivation. My mental representation has a clearer picture of what my stick angles need to do. My pre-performance picture will focus on correct stick angles, and my cue word even now has even more context around how to achieve that concept. The next time I watch video of myself playing, I know what to look for and how to analyze why it went badly or well because I have a more detailed target of that left-hand stick angle, ideally matching my right. And around this loop I go, practicing, playing mocks, taking lessons, and performing until that problem is fixed, and then a new one appears higher up the pyramid that before was kind of obscured or marred because there was a problem lower on the pyramid that had a greater priority. That new problem appears, giving me a new target and more understanding, which then translates to greater ownership and autonomy, greater motivational factors affecting my motor learning. So this spirals and drills down kind of closer and closer to that bedrock of a perfect performance that we all know doesn't exist, but is still what we aim at. So now the last thing that I'm going to do, as I have given this presentation virtually and talked about it with students, and as I've given clinics about these ideas, kind of the number one question that I've gotten, that I think Jason has gotten, that I think a lot of people in the deliberate practice space have gotten is, okay, I understand these ideas. Many of them I've heard before. There might be a few that I haven't. Great, I understand. But what do I do? How do I operationalize this? What do I actually do in the practice room to be more deliberate about my practice? Well, here comes this next slide. Over on the top right, or over just basically the entire right side of this screen here, this is the element that I've added for that. If you only take one thing from this presentation to adjust to your practice process to make it more deliberate, I would say it is record yourself, right? This is not new advice for musicians. Hopefully it's not the first time you've heard that, but I will also say something I've heard many, many times as I've given this presentation is, I knew that was something that I should be doing, I just haven't been doing it. And I think for many of us musicians, myself included, that is a very normal thing. We know that there are things that will help us get better that we just don't do for whatever reason, right? The biggest, so what do I actually do, is record yourself. Record your lessons, record your mocks, record your performances. If you teach, record your teaching. Maintain a digital archive of these recordings that you can go back and look at, right? In my own teaching, I'm starting to have positions where I have a student working on something that I worked on when I was a student, and I'm able to go back, pull up my recordings of me practicing, and either show that to them as a model, or I can pull that up if it's been a long time since I've worked on that and get it back in my head so I can give my student more informed feedback on what they need, where they are. Then below that, if you want to take more than one thing from this, or if you are already effectively recording yourself, expand your mental representation, right? This is your listening homework and your research. This is listening to multiple interpretations of whatever piece you're doing. This is understanding the style that you're in. Broaden your listening, get more music into your head, get greater understanding of the domain knowledge within your particular domain of music that you're operating in. Use visualization using that PETLEP model: physical, environment, task, timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. Create a mental model combination of memory and imagination that is you performing whatever you're working on as perfectly as you can possibly imagine yourself playing it, and use those 7 elements to create that. Have a mental focus outside your body. Create a pre-performance routine that might include a physical motion, like the task relevant motion of Steve Nash miming his own free throw shot before he takes the shot. That might be a mental cue word. I would suggest, and I think Don Green would suggest, it should be all of these. Do 1 rep only mocks and record them, right? Where you're practicing performing so that you're not giving yourself a second rep, so that you get reps where the only thing that matters is the first rep, because that's the only performance that you're doing. Plan your practice time. When are you doing that? When does it fit into your scheduling? What are you going to practice? This is prioritization. And how? What techniques are you going to use? Are you going to use a tuning CD with a drone in the background? Are you going to have a tuner on your stand? Are you going to use a metronome on the beats? Are you going to use a metronome on the off beats? Are you going to use a metronome just on the whole note? Are you going to use a click track that you've personally built? Are you going to record yourself playing the rhythmic skeleton of something and then play with the pitches on top of that? What techniques are you going to use when you get into the practice room? Because most of us have a finite amount of time that we can practice, so we want to get the most that we possibly can. We want to squeeze that fruit of practice as tight as we can to get the greatest return on it. And then review your recordings, just like an athlete watching film after a game. Let your improvement trigger more, faster improvement. Again, my name is Sean Millman. I hold a PhD in percussion from NYU, and I teach for Missouri Southern State University, and I very much appreciate your time. Thank you.